Great. There are still a couple of people joining us, so I'm speaking very slowly as folks join us. I am going to go ahead and get us started here. I notice so we do have captioning today that is available through stream text. So if if our host could pop that in the chat, that would be really great. Thank you very much, Brianna. Okay. So welcome, everyone. I will be the moderator today, and I want to begin with a few access notes and some introductions. Access notes first. Uh, Eva, our fabulous captioner, is joining us. So if you would like to use captioning, you can go to your Zoom bar, the toolbar, likely at the bottom of your screen, and select the button that looks like a square with the letter CC to show captions, or you can access the streaming captions using the link that was just put in the chat to view your captions in a separate browser. For those using ASL interpretation today, Ginevra and Elizabeth are graciously here as our interpreters. If you would like to pin the interpreters to your Zoom screen, please send us a note via chat to the host, and we will make certain that you have that capability. If at any time you find yourself struggling with access during this panel, please let the Zoom hosts know via chat, and we will assist you. Great. Thank you all for joining our panel today on succeeding in the internship and job search as a student with a disability. This panel is hosted by the Career and Internship Center in collaboration with the Disability Resources for Students Office and the Disability Studies Program. My name is Heather. I am faculty here at the University of Washington in the Disability Studies program, and I identify as multiply disabled. I am honored to welcome this incredible group of panelists who have agreed to be here today to share their job seeking wisdom and success stories with us. So we have prepared a set of questions for the panelists today, but we want to hear your questions and concerns as well. So please put them into the chat box, and I will work to weave those questions in and ask our panelists to address them. So rather than me trying to introduce everyone, instead what I'm going to do is I'd like to call on each of our panelists and ask you to share your name, um, information about what your internship or job is, and I'd like you to briefly describe your difference in your body or mind, disability, health condition, impairment, um, and share that information so that our audiences have some context for the ways in which that might shape how you navigate employment and seeking jobs. At the outset, I just want to say to our audience and to our panelists that we recognize that having a difference in your body or mind can look and sound and be experienced in a wide variety of ways. There is no one language that we use to describe ourselves. And so we want to be very opening to whatever terms or labels each of our panelists use to describe their situation, as well as however those in the audience describe theirs. So there's no wrong words today. We are all here to share ideas and learn from each other. So again, with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to each introduce themselves, tell us their current job or internship, and give us some context for their own disability or condition and how that might impact their employment situation. Um, Olivia R., I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Ramolino, and I Um, I have my notes for what the question is. My name, information about your internship or job. So currently, I work as a dietitian at a substance use treatment center. I'm based in Minneapolis now, but I went to the University of Washington for my graduate program. That's my current job, but I've also, before I went back to school to become a dietitian, I worked in disability services. So I worked in disability services at the University of Wisconsin, and then I also worked in disability services at the University of Washington. Um, Mostly in the DSO office and then briefly in the DRS office while I was in grad school. So that was sort of a first career. And then working in healthcare as a dietitian has been kind of my second more recent career. Um, and my disability is hearing loss. So I have severe hearing loss, bilateral, both ears, and wear hearing aids in both ears as well. Um, in school, I used in college, I used captioning as an accommodation, and in my work, um, it has looked more like advocating for myself. I don't use captioning, but I do frequently have to um, kind of let people know that I have hearing loss and um, kind of put it out there as something for others to be aware of, just so that I can make sure that I have my needs met. So it's definitely different in my professional career, like what my needs are compared to what I used and needed in terms of accommodations in undergrad and graduate school. Um, and I'm sure I can talk more about that later. So I'll let somebody else go now.
Great. This is Heather. Thank you. I said Olivia R because we also have another Olivia. So let's go on to Olivia A. Again, if you would introduce yourself, tell us where you're working or have an internship and a little more context.
Thank you, Heather. This is Olivia Aka. I am a current access coordinator actually at the University of Seattle Disability Resources for Students. So I am currently working full time. I will also be speaking about previous experiences as an intern and part-time worker through either disability resources here on campus or nonprofits up in Bellingham during my time at undergraduate. So I'll be speaking to a variety of different experiences and jobs. I have achondroplasia dwarfism. You may commonly hear that referred to as being a dwarf or a little person. It is a skeletal dysplasia which impacts my bone growth and formation, making me a little shorter than the average person. And obviously, there are some mobility and health related impacts that come along with that. So I navigate mostly accommodations around physical needs and workplace space type accommodations. All right, that's me.
Great. Thank you. This is Heather speaking. Next, let's move to Kelsey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Kelsey Kaczynski. I am a marketing manager at a local boat lift manufacturer, and I have ADHD and bipolar 2 disorder. How that kind of plays out in the job and education spectrums for me is a lot about managing my energy so that I don't overextend myself, and I go to therapy regularly to learn coping mechanisms for on the job and in school. Luckily, I'm a MBA student currently. I do full-time MBA and full-time work. Um, and luckily, with my MBA, I get free therapy through the school, and it's the best therapist I've ever had. There's a plug for university therapy. They do really good work. And yeah, just kind of how that plays out with me is advocating for myself in times where I need a break from being overstimulated, or when I need to potentially take notes in different ways during meetings, or follow up more often to make sure I'm connecting dots with what people are talking about. But yeah, I'm happy to talk more details about that, and how I use accommodations through schooling and in work.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelsey. This is Heather speaking. Uh, Kunal, how about you introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Kunal Mehta. I graduated last year from the master's program in human-centered design and engineering. I'm currently working uh, I still haven't left UW, so I'm at the Tasker Center, which is one of the research labs within the computer science department here. So yeah, and in terms of my disability, I'm blind. I extensively use screen readers as an accommodation and sometimes assistance to navigate newer spaces, for instance. But yeah, maybe I'll speak more. Oh, I must also mention I'm an international student, so there's also the additional navigating the visa situation and stuff like that. So yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kunal. Yes, that is a lot of systems to navigate that you mentioned. Glad that you're here. And then the last member on our panel that I'm going to ask introduce themselves is Megan.
Hello, my name is Megan Bowl. About 17 years ago, I had a spinal cord injury that left me a C5, C6 tetraplegic, also known as a quadriplegic. And that means I have gross motor movement of my upper arms, but I don't have any fine motor movement in my hands. And I ended up being able to go to medical school and graduated from the University of Washington School of Medicine. And I am now doing my residency through the University of Washington School of Medicine in Boise. I have some adaptive equipment. I have like a Bluetooth stethoscope so I can listen to heartbeats and lung sounds and abdominal gurgling through the stethoscope that goes through my phone on my Bluetooth. I also have what I call a bionic arm. I was wondering if there was a sign for bionic. Sorry, get distracted too. But that allows me to kind of do a pinching motion with my fingers, allows me to type. And when I first started medical school, I ended up doing all the physical exam stuff myself until we had a sit down with some of the deans in the School of Medicine. And they said, realistically, you would probably work with an assistant once you get into the real world. So they actually set me up with an assistant while I was in medical school. So my last year, my 4th year, I was able to work with an assistant, got to train them up to help me with physical exams and kind of do brief scribing for me. And now I'm in my residency, so.
This is Heather speaking. Wonderful. Well, thank you. Again, we appreciate you being here, and we won't pretend that we didn't try to maximize some diversity of experiences across the panel. And so we're just really thrilled to have you here talk about these things. So I think for a lot of folks, the first step in even really thinking about searching for a job is considering disclosure, the timing of when to disclose or what to disclose. And so I'm wondering, I'm going to start with Olivia R., if I can. If you could talk to us a little bit about just review if you have disclosed to your current employer. Um, and, as a dietitian, um, I think maybe for you talking about also to what degree you might disclose to patients or clients that you work with and how that process has been, particularly when you were thinking about, getting settled into this job or perhaps even the interviewing process. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, thank you. This is Olivia R. I have a variety of different experiences with disclosing, and you're kind of spot on that it as a dietitian and as a person working in a profession where there's a client or a patient that I have to interact with, I'm navigating disclosure with my employer as well as the people that I interact with and that I'm kind of serving in a way, or meeting with um, individually or as a group. So in I've also worked in a variety of different positions as a dietitian already. So previous to this current position, I was working in an eating disorder treatment center, and that position had a requirement where I had to eat meals with clients that were like living and receiving treatment through the center, and I was doing group nutrition education. So those situations required disclosure and advocating with the clients that I was kind of working with. And I can feel myself getting off track right there, but basically disclosure. I have always disclosed, and I've always disclosed for the reason of like making my experience more accessible and making it so that other people know why I might act in a certain way. If I'm asking them to repeat themselves more than once, or even just once, like making sure that they know that it's not coming from any place other than my disability. So there I usually disclose in the interview process in terms of like when I disclose. And that's, like I said, I want to make sure that they understand like my experience, and that if I don't hear something, it is not because I'm not paying attention, it is just because I didn't hear them, and that I have a disability. So yeah, I think I might have answered part of your question. I'll wrap up right there.
This is Heather. No, that is great. Um, I'm also, I want to turn now to Olivia A. And I'm wondering particularly if you could speak about your internship experience. I believe I wrote down nonprofits, but if you could talk a little bit about your internship experience and how you approach disclosure in that setting.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Heather. Again, this is Olivia speaking, Olivia Acuff. So for the internships, so I did my graduate up here at the University of Washington, or down here, I guess I should say, because I was up in Bellingham for my undergraduate at the Western Washington University. And I did internships at a couple of nonprofits just locally to the area. One of them was this one called Camp Fire or Camp Spark, which was a summer camp for students and or children in the area. And I interned as their like HR intern, and I just kind of got into the field. Now, when I was interviewing, with the nature of my condition, when you meet me in person, which was the nature of the interview itself, it's very obvious that I am disabled. You can tell. It's not really a secret. I can't really hide it because it's physically visible. And so I don't really get the choice to disclose or not. That's something that I just have to then maneuver around, is that knowing that I'm already going to be disclosing just by being there. And so that was kind of, especially as somebody, because I was getting into my internship younger than everybody else because I had fast tracked some of my credits in my program. So not only the process of being disabled and going through the interviews, but also being a lot younger than most people going through that process and figuring out how to navigate that and make sure that one, I'm, showing the experience and the knowledge that I do have, but also acknowledging that this is something that I experience. And with my internships at the nonprofit, there were some physical tasks like lifting items, moving around boxes, and some of those I couldn't do. And so when I was interviewing or disclosing, I was very clear on what I could or couldn't do. And a lot of that just came from a confidence of if it fits, it fits. If it doesn't, I'm going to find something. I'm going to make sure that I keep going. And carving out the time and space to do that when you're also dealing with a program is difficult. And I do recognize that from my experiences in past and from what I've heard from my students working here at the University of Washington. It can be challenging to find that time and space, but just kind of a level of persistent I found was really helpful, and just kind of connecting, checking in and making those one-on-one connections, but also acknowledging that this is something that I have to experience. And so I'm very upfront about it. And I tend to use humor a lot to cope, which maybe isn't the best route, but it's just the route that I've chosen for myself. And so I'll, make a lighthearted joke, which will then lead into a further conversation about, well, actually, I might need some stools and some grabbers and, certain tasks I may not be able to do. Do you think that would, pose a concern or a challenge? And then having them articulate back to me whatever those specific concerns that they may have had in the moment, where most of the places that I ended up working at were actually very, able to work with me, willing to work with me, and kind of talked me through the ways that we might modify certain tasks in those interviews, which I found obviously very uplifting in that moment. But obviously going into that, I didn't know what that scenario was going to look like. I hope that answered the question.
This is Heather. This is fantastic. And I'll kind of just quiz the panel. Is there anyone on our panel that did not disclose to their employer either during the interview or right after they got their job? Kelsey, yeah, will you talk a little bit about your decision process about that?
Yeah. So I very easily talk about my ADHD when I'm doing interviews and stuff like that. Or right after I got a job, I will disclose it to my boss just so that he kind of knows how my brain works. I feel very, as somebody who has like invisible disabilities, and I've masked very, very well my ADHD over my life. I was actually raised by a father with OCD, and so I inherited his traits of perfectionism and organization. And so the normal description of somebody with ADHD is scatterbrained, disorganized, like not able to keep track of things. And that doesn't necessarily relate to me. I'm able to keep those things together until very high stress situations. And then I burn out very, like, on the drop of a dime. Which is why I kind of touched earlier about managing my energy. But so it's easier for me to bring up the ADHD in conversations because I feel like that's one that's a little bit more understood commonly. But I have not disclosed with my workplace and about my bipolar 2 because I feel like that is a more misunderstood diagnosis. And it's something that I even struggle with my family to properly articulate. Um, I had a bad experience with one of my close family members where I told them about it and they didn't talk to me for a while because they said they were trying to process that information because they were then later in a conversation I found out that they were kind of relating it more to somebody who was manic depressive, which is also a very different thing. And so I think bipolar, even the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 are very different. And so I haven't been in the space where I felt like it affected work in a way that I could articulate and spend my energy educating, if that makes sense.
This is Heather. Yes, Kelsey, I would say that that makes a lot of sense to many of us. Both the decision to perhaps not disclose all of the differences that you experience in being neurodivergent. Again, I don't mean to projects that term onto you, but that's a term that some folks use. But also in figuring out a way to articulate that in a way that a workplace can understand it and can understand how to accommodate it. That I think that's a real issue for a lot of folks. And that's actually what I would like to kind of transition into, is to talk a little bit about those high stress moments. Again, I don't mean to project onto folks, but I think everyone can relate to interviews being a particularly stressful time or moment. And for those of us who work hard to manage our mental as well as physical stamina, that can really be a lot in the moment. So I would like to start, Megan, I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the interview process, how you prepared for it, to both be physically as well as cognitively right at the top of your game during the interview.
So actually, while Kelsey was speaking, I was thinking of one of my interviews for medical school where I mean, before I even applied to medical school, I put a lot of thought into how I could be a doctor with some of my limitations. And so I met with an occupational therapist and got that bionic arm and was working with that and practicing physical exams on my occupational therapist. I was doing a lot of shadowing and things like that. And so I had put a lot of thought into it. Actually reached out to the University of Washington and say, hey, what are the physical exam maneuvers, the basic ones I need to be able to do to get in and to get through school? And they sent that to me. So I did put a lot of thought into it. And during one interview, they wrapped up with, do you have any questions, like they always do? And I asked my few about the program. And then I also brought up, I said, I don't know if you're legally allowed to ask me these questions, but I have put a lot of thought into how I can be a doctor with the limitations that I do face. And the interviewer took it completely the wrong way and was like, it's not like we're afraid to ask you questions. And it was, so I had to take a moment back, and like he just kind of blustered on for a while. And I left that interview going, well, I didn't get in there. So it was definitely interesting. I try to bring it up in other, like change my wording a bit in the next few interviews, and they seem to go better. But it was definitely one of those moments where I was like, that's not how I meant it at all. So I think just being able to roll with it. I think one of the best things I did in preparation for my interviews is I had a colleague of mine in the same research group that I went to, that we sat down and asked each other, all the interview questions. We printed off like 2,000 interview questions that can be asked on a medical school interview. And I think it was really helpful in not only being able to share my story and kind of get my wording correctly for those sorts of topics that are apparently hot button, that I didn't think were hot button, but also to kind of see his interpretation of it, because he was from the Congo originally, came over at 14. So it was really interesting, like being able to compare our stories and our different backgrounds. And we actually both got into the same class. So we went to medical school together. So I think that was the best thing, is just being able to practice, being able to tell your story, and in such a way apparently that it doesn't rub people the wrong way, which was definitely not my intention. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, this is Heather. That's incredibly helpful. Lessons learned from real experiences, always helpful. And just to recap, to make sure I caught that, it sounds like you were saying that you just might have to try a few interviews before you really feel comfortable and before it sticks, and B, the practicing with others, that is doing mock interviews, asking each other questions, which seems like invaluable advice.
And this is
Uh,
Megan. Also being able to shrug off the one-off bad reaction.
This is Heather. That's great. Olivia R., can we get you in this
Yeah,
conversation?
I just wanted to say, like, that experience is very it like resonated very much with me, and I feel like one thing that I would have appreciated hearing as like an undergrad or even just a student in grad school, as I'm starting to think about like looking into the workforce and working, is the process of advocating for yourself and articulating your needs is an ongoing learning process. Like I still feel like I am kind of workshopping how to articulate my needs in different settings to different people, and sometimes in similar settings. So like it's not necessarily like I will I don't feel like it's like a destination of like, okay, I know exactly how to advocate for myself and I know exactly how to describe my needs. And it works in every situation. It's more of like kind of an ongoing like tweaking, figuring out what works and what doesn't to explain things to people. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, this is Heather. Thank you for that. And I'll just say there are many of our panelists are nodding their head in agreement about the ongoing process. And also just the acknowledgement that even when we might be comfortable talking about our disability or our accommodation needs, doesn't necessarily mean that others are going to be comfortable, and learning to be patient and sit with other people's discomfort and kind of wait for them to catch up with you. On this theme of articulating needs or figuring out what works best for you, whether that's in the interview or in the job, I'd like to turn to Kunal. I know that you've done some transitioning maybe from folks that are familiar with you, but can you talk a little bit about how did you learn what accommodations worked best for you on the job?
Um, I kind of knew obviously things like having material in a screen reader friendly format and those sort of things are important and that I knew before. But I think on the job, things like, getting enough visual assistance to do some of the things that I need to or that I want to, I think I realize is important. And I could do something without that assistance maybe, but it would take a lot more time or the quality wouldn't be as per how I might like it. So I think I slowly learned to ask help where I needed visual assistance, um, straight away put my hand up and say, hey, formatting slides is not something that is a strength for me. So is anyone able to take that on or help me with that? So that sort of thing, I think kind of helped me. And as I learned, through different jobs and different work. As I learned that I needed these things when I go to interview the next place or for the next job, I kind of try and put these out straight, and see how that goes. Sometimes I think it maybe I ask for too many things. Sometimes people take it well, but yeah, that's how I've been doing. Another task that I've recently learned is I need visual assistance when I'm maybe doing some research on the field, testing some of the things we built with participants, and yeah, I think asking for that has been easier for everyone, has made it easier for everyone. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Megan, would you like to join in here?
Yeah, so this is Megan. I started medical school with kind of no idea what it was going to be like. There was no doctors in my family. I'm just stubborn enough to I'd figure it out. So I think I relied heavily on the disability resource people at the University of Washington. And it was kind of a come up with a game plan by the seat of our pants and as we go along, which was actually quite wonderful. We met fairly frequently. They would, each new rotation I'd go on, they'd come up with the requirements of, okay, these are the requirements for this rotation for you to pass. What do we need to figure out? And together we would brainstorm a bunch of things and we'd try out a bunch of things, and whatever worked, we'd kind of keep it on the docket, kind of like Kunal said. And things that didn't, we just would scrap. So I came into medical school not having no idea what I needed. And so I think shout out to the Disability Resource Center. So
Thanks. This is Heather. Yes, shout out. And I would also just remind folks that here at the University of Washington, as well as other places that are state agencies, are here to help, not just for the nitty gritty of a particular class, but our general resources. And I know a couple of you have mentioned occupational therapists as important folks. Vocational therapists are important professionals that can also help you. But again, I want to dig a little deeper. Kunal listed some really great specific accommodations. And I'm wondering, I think for many of us, particularly if it's our first job, it is hard to know what accommodations are out there. Even if you've had accommodations in school, it's not necessarily the same system when you move into employment. And Kelsey, I want to come back to you. You mentioned a couple of things, or the way that ADHD can show up in your workplace that you may need. But I'm wondering if you could talk us through, first, have you requested formal accommodations or are these more informal? And what what is some of the range of accommodations you use in your marketing position?
Yeah. I have not requested formal accommodations. I guess in my time of adapting to school and work after being diagnosed later in life with ADHD and bipolar disorder, it's been more figuring out, obviously, what situations feel triggering to me, and then kind of working to, okay, what could I have used in that moment to make this not happen? Because there are days with my ADHD where so much is going on that I start getting analysis paralysis, right? Where I have no idea where to start, and then I find myself frozen making lists, and 2 hours go by and I haven't done anything on the list. I'm just making the list, right? So that's something common for people with ADHD to suffer from. There's so much to do that I have no idea even where to start. But as far as accommodations that I get through work, I think as I'm in this discovery process, something that's really worked for me is finding people you can trust within these spaces to disclose to, and then them kind of asking more questions to get a better understanding. So, for example, I have a really great relationship with my boss. I just started at this job about 6 months ago. And in the first couple times of him having one on one interactions in our one on one meetings, I would drop hints here and there like, oh, yeah, that's a little hard for me to grasp just because I have ADHD and this and this and that, and give examples in the moment of, I didn't get there as fast as you because of this. And this is what I was thinking about. And then he starts to then understand how my brain works in the threads. And then, next time I'm in that situation, I'll say, hey, do you mind if I repeat this back to you so I can connect that dot and make sure I understood it the way that you intended me to understand it? So I think it's less of me getting actual accommodations for my job in marketing, but it's more, you start building an understanding and trust with the people around you. And in doing this, I found out that two of my main coworkers who I work with one-on-one every day also have ADHD. And it shows up very differently for them and than it does for me. And so then we can kind of talk to each other about how can I support you? And just kind of building trust with people.
This is Heather. Thank you, Kelsey. I think you emphasized several really good points, which is there may be situations in which we're not totally certain that a formal accommodation would serve us best. And so we look for positions that have certain kinds of flexibility. And your point about finding individuals with which you can build trust or solidarity, I think is really key. A lot of the literature out there is starting to focus more and more on culture climate. And work climate. And that is one of those questions of how can you tell what a workplace climate is like until you've worked there? Um, so I don't know if any of you have some immediate ideas or signals that you look for or that you have learned to look for in workplaces. But if you do, I want you to let us know. And Kelsey, yeah, it looks like you've already got something in mind.
Yes, this is Kelsey again. Something that I think it was Olivia A spoke about earlier was the idea of being yourself in an interview and just right off the bat showing them exactly who you are. Because I think that helped me find a workplace full of people that I very quickly could trust. Because I would give previous examples of, hey, in my last workplace, this situation happened. And I didn't necessarily appreciate how that was handled. How would you handle that situation? And I give things that happened to me. For example, just like being a woman in a business field. Sometimes you have, things happen. And so would give examples of even something like that that could be controversial, and I would say, this happened. This is what I didn't like about it. How would you approach that? Because that could be a red flag depending on how they answer, right? So if you have examples of how you weren't accommodated for and you asked for specific things and it was made it difficult for you to do something in school or a past job, and you give that example and you say, how would you guys approach that situation if I were to come and ask you for accommodations? I think that jobs deserve to be interviewed just as much as we are trying to get them.
This is Heather muted. Thank you, Kelsey. Yes, and that makes me think, Olivia A, of something you brought up earlier about using some humor to often kind of open the doorway to talking about different ways of doing things on the job. And again, I know better than to make assumptions about any type of organization. Leading to a specific kind of culture. But I'm wondering from your perspective, what your experience has been in navigating accommodations and were they mostly formal or informal? Yeah, if you could speak to that.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you, Heather. Again, this is Olivia A. So in terms of, yeah, humor and approaching it, again, I don't get the choice to disclose, so I'm very always upfront and to the point about it. And so in my undergraduate programs, when I was doing internships and things like that, I always would kind of frame it as like, if I had these access needs, what would you do? Similar to how Kelsey is kind of stating, like, in this scenario, what would you do? What would that look like? And then obviously, as I got into my graduate programs and I worked my way up into applying to DRS, with the workplace and the way that the nature is, I had assumed, obviously, which maybe not is the best thing to do, assume, but I had gained an understanding that I felt like the culture was going to be a little more welcoming and open in those spaces just because it was something that they were working on and they were finding. And so when I went in my first interview, I had said, these are the two things that I need the most often. So for me, when I sit into an office chair, because of the way my limbs are statured, I sit way up close to I sit further up to the front of the seat than the back. So I don't always touch the back of the chair. And then obviously I'm a little shorter than everybody else, so my legs don't quite touch the floor. So I talked about a stool and a cushion for my chair to allow me to sit at my office space and, you know, make that work for me. We also talked about like adjustable desks and things like that. And I just kind of asked, is this something that I would need to submit a formal accommodation request for? And this is something that I goofingly did because I didn't really know how accommodations work as an individual, because I had always gotten some form of informal accommodations. I had never requested formal accommodations very often, just because it was always just like throwing a stool somewhere and, you know, kind of making it work as we went type of a situation. So I even said, like, I can send you links, I can send you all the information. You know, I have these certain things that I know already work for me. So, and they had just gone, no, it's a very simple thing. We can make this work. And so most of my accommodations have been through my leadership, which my leadership is amazing. They're very accommodating and they work with you on a one-on-one basis. Similar to Kelsey's experience, my direct leadership, I've worked with him very closely. And I find that, you know, him disclosing his situations to me made me more willing to disclose my situations. And so now that I work with my students, I'll disclose what I experience to my students. And I find that commonality or common disclosure is one of the things that really can make you feel like, oh, this is a workplace or this is a culture that I know I can feel safe in or feel like I can share these things. And that gave me the bravery to kind of ask for those informal accommodations. So most of my things have been informal. I have gone through the formal process before once or twice, and I found that that's a little bit longer and a little bit more intimidating sometimes because there are more steps and things associated that maybe you're not as familiar with. But again, having that guidance one-on-one with my leadership has been extremely helpful for me in those situations.
This is Heather. Thank you. Yeah, Megan.
Hi, this is Megan again. I have so many ideas when I hear everyone else's stories. I like the idea of community. Here at the Boise Internal Medicine Residency Program, we do most of our training at the VA. And so I came into the program expecting to maybe get a little bit more pushback about my disability and being a physician. It actually quite surprised me. Veterans love me. And I think it's because, one, especially in the hospital, they see my disability as almost like a bonding sort of thing. We had one veteran recently who was at end of life and was resisting home hospice and actually cursed out our palliative care team and kicked them out. And I was able to go in there and be like, well, I'm trying to, put myself in your shoes. And I'm trying to think of what, your big goal is to go home. And I think the easiest and best way that we can get you home and keep you home is with this. And he actually was able to open up to me a lot more than he had any other provider. And I think it really had a lot to do with the bonding experience. And he even told his family about me. The daughter, the daughter was like, I knew who you were before you even said your name. And I was like, what is it? The winning smile? It's not the, 500-pound wheelchair that I sit in all day. But anyway, thinking of humor. But also the colleagues I work with are wonderful. I've ran over a couple of them accidentally, and they are pretty awesome about it. So I think finding a good community and getting comfortable in that community is pretty amazing.
Thank you. That's great. Olivia R. I want to turn to you for this if you have thoughts, but it's open to all panelists. But we have someone in our audience who brings up, there are real differences between disabilities that are readily apparent versus not. So, for example, I have a number of disabilities, most of which are not readily apparent, and on many days I can pass as non-disabled, which means that I have to even exert or assert the fact that I have accommodation needs prior to that conversation. But particularly for individuals who have a non-apparent disability, that is still, a number of those, especially those that are related to chronic illnesses or other conditions are not well understood, and might even fall under, a lot of suspicion, if not, assumptions about. I see Kelsey nodding. Yes, Kelsey can relate to this. But Olivia, I'm going to ask you first about what kinds of accommodations or initiating a conversation about needing accommodations for something that's non-apparent. And you've talked a little bit about wanting people to know that if you need to ask a question twice, etc., why. And so I'm curious if your other thoughts about those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I want to acknowledge like the labor that it takes to advocate for yourself and like do it kind of all the time. And especially with an invisible or like an invisible disability in the sense that I can like hide my hearing aids and like, people it's not automatically apparent that I have a disability or what my needs are based on looking at me. It it's exhausting to constantly or consistently have to kind of articulate my needs. So I just want to acknowledge that and like unfortunately acknowledge that it doesn't really get better. Like because it's just part of um my experience. I've accepted that it's part of my experience to continually need to advocate for myself and ask for my needs. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there to start. And in terms of like um requesting things that don't always make sense to other people that don't have the same experience as me. Like some examples would be more informal accommodations, but even formal accommodations of like seating things, like requesting certain seats for meetings for reasons that don't make any sense to people. Like I need to be with my back to the window so that everyone else isn't backlit so that I can see their faces and read their lips better. That is like not something that is on anyone's radar who doesn't have hearing loss or who doesn't, utilize lip reading to a certain degree. So things like that, requesting seating. And to be honest, that's something that like meeting, I have to request every meeting or kind of like ask people to move if like my manager would forget to put my little name sign out. So it's a constant kind of thing. What was the question again? Was it, did I answer it?
This is other. No, I think that is really helpful about the reminder. It's kind of ongoing. Kelsey, I'm gonna return to you because again, the lot of the head nodding, and particularly, for example, so someone had mentioned having, like a chemical sensitivity, for example, something that takes a constant reminding potentially of not just leadership, but certainly anybody who works in your workspace. And I'm kind of coming back to you, Kelsey, because you'd mentioned being aware of triggers
Mm-hmm.
and being aware of the ways that triggers can impact you, even if it's not about formal accommodations. But I would like to know, like, have you or how you have kind of communicated with coworkers or this or that to potentially get them to avoid things that might be problematic, even without giving a full disclosure, or any thoughts you would have for someone who say has something like chemical sensitivity.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of have two things with two different areas of my life and my experiences. But one, as far as triggers with my ADHD, and so with ADHD, there's a thing called RSD that almost every ADHD person has, called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And it's something that I severely suffer from as growing up a people pleaser along with somebody who has ADHD. And basically, this experience is I can receive feedback about my work and not feel personally affected or targeted by that information. But if somebody makes a comment in a specific tone, I very much read into it to like a severe level of like spiraling. And it can affect my productivity and my headspace and my energy level for the entire rest of the day and sometimes multiple days. Because then it can kind of feed into my bipolar disorder and my energy levels there and keeping those leveled out. Um, and so there was a specific situation with a coworker recently where she's actually from a different country. She's Ukrainian, and her culture is a little bit more blunt than some people in the United States. And I also grew up in the Midwest, where we kind of fluff up conversation a bit more to begin with, compared to even Seattle, where people can be more direct. And so there were times where, for example, I was closing the window shades and she asked me, "Do you not like the sun?" And I very much was confused by that comment because I thought, is she mad that I'm closing the window? Is there a reason she wanted it open? Because really, it was just hitting my screen at the perfect angle that I was blinded. So I wasn't doing it intentionally because I didn't want to see the sun that day. In fact, I've been craving it, right? Um, but I took that comment and it was very difficult for me. So something I spoke to my boss about actually is I want to be able to understand her more so that I understand her intent a little bit better. And so I said, I want to ask you, I want to explain a situation to you. And I don't want you to take it as me starting drama, me complaining, because I really like working with her. But if there's any potential for more context of how she speaks to other people, then it would help me be able to like counter this rejection or judgment that I feel when I know logically in my brain that there isn't any being placed on me. So that's one way with the rejection sensitivity. And then something else that like I can be triggered by that I've been dealing with for a lot longer in my life, so it's a lot easier for me to deal with. But when I was 15 years old, I actually was diagnosed with a food disability as well. So I have celiac disease, which means I'm allergic to wheat, rye, and barley. And something that I kind of suffer from is people bringing in foods that I can't have. And they're always like, "Kelsey, aren't you going to have a cookie?" And I say, "Sorry, I actually can't have cookies." They're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I forgot again." And just like having to remind them repeatedly. And then um, being something I did advocate for was when we would have potlucks or banquets, I would make everybody fill out an individual little table tent that had what allergies that food would have. And then I basically have to trust or choose not to even potentially try some other people's things. But some people get offended when you don't try something. So yeah, that's just a couple things.
This is Heather. Thank you so much. I know that we are technically at time. I've got one more quick question. And this one, Kunal, I wanted to turn to you. And kind of a two-parter is I am aware, working with colleagues who either have low vision or no vision, that given how often we interact on digital spaces or through telephone calls, um, that it's usually the default that people assume that folks are sighted. And so, again, with the reminding people, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your approach to telling people who you've already told that you're blind, um, not just about in those interactions, but thinking of relying on coworkers or colleagues to accommodate one's access needs. You use a screen reader, but your colleagues, if they're not putting things in digitally accessible content, that's not going to help. So, do you have thoughts or advice for other folks about how to handle those constant gentle reminders to people?
Yeah, that's a good question. And with COVID and after COVID, remote and back to work and hybrid and stuff, it's easy for people to forget that. I think I tend to remind as much as I can, and as much as you know, I guess someone mentioned here that, advocating is also labor. So there are days where I don't want to remind. I'm like, it's okay, I'll figure something out. Maybe these days put that image on an AI tool and have it described, for example. And, sometimes I do that. Sometimes it also depends on the type of person. I think it's sort of easy to sense when someone's genuinely forgotten, and I'm happy to remind them. But sometimes I feel, people, sometimes some people just don't get it. So, I don't try and put too much effort into trying to kind of um, um, ask them to be aware or whatever. The other thing is there are some things that are critical, for them to know. There are some people or there are some tasks that are definitely very important, and without which maybe my work would get impacted, or everybody else's, any more people who are involved would be impacted. Then in that case, I don't really have a choice, and I have to say this. The other bit is, it's not just work. Sometimes when you go in person, it's sometimes hard to communicate access needs. Hey, I might need, if it's a new place, we are going to a new place, I might need assistance, like getting into the place when I get dropped off, right? So getting from the door to wherever we are sitting, or can I get some help getting food and things like that. And sometimes you feel, oh, I've been working with these people for so long, and this should be pretty simple because I've navigated many more complex work situations and stuff like that. But this needs to be done whenever it's needed, because I mean, it's pretty genuine that they also might not know, or they might not be aware. But there was a time when I would be like, oh, this is so simple. Can't someone just know this, that okay, I might maybe need help getting around in some place. But yeah, maybe. And then I learned, yeah, maybe not, maybe they don't want to assume. So I have to be more um aware of creating that awareness or sensitizing them. An example would be that no matter what, how many people I know, if I'm going to a new place, I'd be like, hey, I might need someone to come get me at the door. Would that be okay? And it always works out well. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that is really helpful. And I think that is such an important point. Just recognizing that, yeah, it does take extra labor. Most of the things that we're talking about, frankly, just take extra labor that our non-disabled colleagues and counterparts, um, they they may have an understanding or idea, but it's not the same thing as living it and doing it. And so just that reiteration of how important it is to have allies, how important it is to have um, a, a support network to come back to. We are incredibly out of time. And so I want to tell folks that this is being recorded. Everyone has generously agreed to that. So if you need to leave, of course you can. No one has cut us off yet. So I'm going to ask for 5 more minutes. And if we do a speed round here, if you were going to give one piece of quick advice to students who are just about to go out there and search for jobs or internships, what would that advice be? And now that I've made you think about that off the top of your head, I am going to start with Kelsey, because Kelsey has raised their hand.
Hi, this is Kelsey. I would say my advice is to even though it can be difficult, embrace your disability and embrace it as almost a superpower that your brain works differently than most of the people around you and use it to your advantage. And by embracing it, it helps you feel more empowered to advocate for yourself. Um, my ADHD and bipolar disorder, I wasn't diagnosed up until I actually started my master's program. The level of stress doing full-time MBA and full-time work at the same time kind of brought more symptoms to the surface than I've ever experienced before. And it helped me diagnose things. And it actually, in that process, I felt more understood than I ever have in my whole life. And it helped me be a better friend to people, be a better colleague, and just I feel like I overall am working towards being an even better person because I'm acknowledging it and embracing it. So embrace it, and the right people will surround themselves with you, surround you, and they will lift you up and not tear you down.
Great. Thank you. That's so helpful. Olivia A., I'm going to turn to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Olivia A. Backing off of what Kelsey said again, yeah, embracing it. It's giving you a different perspective than anybody else, which allows you to bring a whole new slew of ideas to the table. And this is something that I would probably advise myself on that I didn't do when I was younger, which is don't self-filter the jobs or the interviews or the things that you think you should go for just because of impacts or fear of asking about accommodations or fear of disclosing. You never know until you try. And I know that's a cliche saying, but I really do resonate with it. Like I didn't think I'd be able to do half the nonprofit jobs that I applied for. And I got the one that I actually didn't think I was going to get at all and that I didn't think I was going to be able to do. And so that self-filtering can already take you out of a lot of areas. And so don't do that to yourself. Put yourself out there, even though it's hard, and the opportunities as they come, they will come.
Great. Thank you. Megan.
Wow, they both kind of stole mine. One would be like never give up. I actually ended up having to reapply to medical school. So it was not something I was willing to give up on. I knew it was going to be difficult. But I opened up my personal statement disclosing my disability because I felt like that was a very important reason why I chose medicine. So I think you need to own your story for sure. And yeah, I think don't give up. You can do it. There's ways.
That's fantastic.
Oh, and I do think I'm 100% a better physician because of my disability. So
Yep. That's a field of research I'm in, and I could say you are. Uh, Kunal, what advice do you have for folks?
Um, I would say focus on what you can control.
Mm,
I've had jobs that have surprised me, or even processes that have surprised me both positively and negatively. So focus on what you could control. There could be instances where maybe there's discrimination, maybe there's not, maybe I assume that there is, maybe I assume that there isn't, but there is. But just focusing on what you can control and managing your own energy, and that will help you do things that you need to get to where you want to, or the job you want. Yeah, I think just maintaining and managing that energy and focusing on what you can control really helps.
this is Heather. That's fantastic advice. And then Olivia R. Go ahead, like add after all of those cool things.
Yeah, I know. Just, triple highlight all of them. Yeah, Olivia R. I want to like underline, triple highlight, like put in bold Olivia A's advice of not taking yourself out of the race or self eliminating yourself from positions, because I did that. I did that, and I looked at my like life in undergrad and was like, no, I'm not going to do nutrition. Like I can't do that. And I did it eventually, but I spent a lot of years not doing what I really wanted to do because I thought I couldn't because of various reasons, but disability being one of them. So don't do that. We can do things. And then another thing is just give yourself grace and understanding. And I think there's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves, everyone, but especially us here to like have it all figured out. And it's just not possible. We don't have it all figured out, and we're never going to have it all figured out, and it's just a process, and we all deserve grace in this soup of life.
This is Heather. Wow, those are profound words, I think, for this time and moment that we're all in as well. I would love to continue to grill all of you and your stories, but I sense that I've really gone over time. So I just want to thank all of you again very much for being here. We really, really appreciate you sharing not only your experiences and advice, but want to recognize that it's an act of vulnerability to talk about lessons learned or things that didn't go perfectly as well as the things that go well. So thank you all very much. Thank you to our audience. I believe that Brianna and Travis will still be here for a few extra minutes if we didn't get to all of